Amidst government disruption. Oh, what is this? I'll just click it on. Oh, nice. Okay. So originally it was regulatory disruption, but I think it was maybe slightly confusing that this is going to be a talk about boring shit like NIST or the ISO. When it's not, it's talking about government disruption where they have like operations against threat groups and actors. So essentially what the talk is about, to kind of cut through the waffle, is it'll be about how threat groups and actors change their activities and diversify when they are disrupted by government operations such as Operation Kronos, etc., that we'll kind of go into. So just kind of kick things off. Who am I? So I'm Allena Matheson-Dear. I'm a security analyst where I specialize sort of in threat intelligence and incident response at the Weir Group. So the Weir Group is a manufacturing organization based in Glasgow. They make, what do we do? Sort of manufacture mining parts and technology. Most importantly, I'm an Abertay ethical hacking graduate from 2023. When I was at university in fourth year, I kind of specialized towards sort of operational technology and industrial cybersecurity. And during this time, in fourth year, I worked on this project. I did have one that was a picture of me crying with this kit, but I was told that was a bit of a downer. So instead you get this one. And basically what it was my dissertation was on the smart factory that had a PLC that's connected to like a cloud interface like HMI, and I conducted a pen test on it, and from there kind of did a threat assessment on how that would apply to the real world of like OT and ICS, where things are never that simple. So just to kind of talk about what's on the agenda. So I do want the talk to be quite accessible, because obviously this is a student conference, so I'm going to explain some like key concepts and things. If anyone doesn't understand anything that I kind of went over, but I don't think that will be the case, feel free to kind of chat to me afterwards. So we're going to talk a bit about like understanding threat intelligence and threat landscape and what that really means, understanding what government disruption actually is, and to kind of incorporate this, we'll go over a couple case studies, and we'll also do kind of what that really means and how it creates challenges for threat analysts and threat researchers kind of from that sort of activity. So just a couple key components. So threat intelligence. Threat intelligence is really just the culmination of a bunch of different sources. So it could be like OSINT, it could be human intelligence, it could be dark web monitoring or sharing threat groups internally or whatever you want, processing the data to kind of cut out the bluffs and, most importantly, find the relevancy to your organization or your person. And to kind of find this relevancy, you look at your threat landscape. So a threat landscape is different in every sort of context you have. So at Weir, for example, because we're an OT, ICS manufacturing organization, we're very at risk of that sort of area, mostly fear of like financially motivated attackers, maybe some hacktivist activity, depending on kind of what's going on. But our threat landscape would look very different to sort of Abertay's threat landscape or the NHS's threat landscape, because this is obviously more public services, healthcare, education. So what I'm talking about today is really how threat intelligence can be disrupted in that concept of the data that you're kind of pulling in, because it becomes maybe not so reliable or not so relevant anymore. So to kind of touch on government disruption, I used the word regulatory because I wanted this big, originally, because I wanted this big umbrella term for everyone I was sort of talking about, because obviously these regulatory bodies like NIST or the ISO or whatever create the sort of regulations that organizations should have to abide by. However, it's government bodies such as like the FBI or the NCA or the NSA who are enforcing it and kind of launching these like the cyber operations, which is really what I'm wanting to talk about. So that was the reason for the change, and that's who I'm referencing today. Disruption is a very key word that's used. It's purposefully never said by the FBI or anything like that. They would never use the word takedown. They'd never use the word dismantlement. And this is because it can't be guaranteed. When you say those words, it almost seems like in the public interest, you'd be saying lockbit or gone, when really like that will never happen. And so that's why it's purposely never used. It's kind of like a PR point. So just a couple examples, though, to kind of put this in perspective, is these are just some examples from the past few weeks, really, past month or so. So the FBI, Europol, and NCA have been working on taking down, I know I said they never use the word takedown. What I will say is this was from media. The FBI reports never say it. Media can do what they want. Took down some 8-base ransomware data leak in negotiation sites. This is talking about infrastructure damage. Similarly, what's been going on a lot is the US and the Dutch authorities have been looking at disrupting domains connected to business email compromise fraud and their networks. So in the new age of phishing, if you're a well-established organization, your threat isn't this sort of phishing where it's like throwing shit and seeing where it sticks. It's more about your threat is BC. It's about your supply chain. It's how it always is constantly moving around. Obviously, that's never to say that those shitty phishing emails never work. They do. But really, that's your big threat. So there's been a lot of work in kind of disrupting that sort of activity to try and prevent those supply chains kind of spiraling so out of control. A lot of work that's been happening as well is operations in Nigeria. So there's a lot of crypto scams that are kind of going on. So Interpol and Afropol have been kind of targeting this. They've been seizing sort of operations that are going on there. And similarly, a lot of romance scams. So this one in particular, this is quite a harrowing story, is talking about how they targeted a romance scam business that was operating in an office in Nigeria, where they seized shit tons of SIM cards, disrupted their sort of marketplaces that they were going on from there as well. It was linked to a similar operation that was going on in Pakistan, but it was just the mass amount was just insane. So to kind of talk about some case studies to kind of really put this into perspective. So first up, we have Black Cat, or Alfie. So I'm just going to use the word Black Cat just because it's easier. Loads of different organizations, staff have their own naming terminology for all the groups. No one's got time to learn all them. So Black Cat is allegedly Russian-based. At first they denied this, but I think they then now agreed that they are from Russia, or at least based there, but are adamant that they are apolitical. What's quite interesting, though, is from reviewing different operations after, spoiler alert, sort of disrupting their infrastructure, there was evidence to suggest that that Black Cat run checks and enforce their affiliates to run checks that none of their victims are based in CIS countries. So this is the Commonwealth of Independent State. So these are all your countries that are former Soviet Union, so Russia, Kazakhstan, Belarus, and they're sort of blacklisted from being targeted. But really to kind of understand how Black Cat became so notorious and well known and one of the biggest threats in the past few years, you kind of need to go back to where they started to kind of see how they've kind of diversified to get there. So they first were known as the group DarkSide. So they first emerged in August 2020. If you really want to get into the nitty-gritty, you can say that there's evidence that DarkSide were a fractured off group from Revil, but there's just not enough time to kind of go that far back and see where everyone's kind of jumping from job to job. So they first emerged in 2020. What this group are most known for is the Colonial Pipeline attack in 2021. So you can kind of see it in the background. If you don't know what the Colonial Pipeline is, it's this gas line that runs from the entire East Coast and then some of the US, and it carries gas and jet fuel. So during the attack, it was quite severe and it stopped payment systems, and they ended up turning off the pipeline because they were worried about it spiraling further out of control. So because of this, obviously jet fuel couldn't get transferred, flights ended up getting cancelled, people started panic buying gas, and about 100 gigabytes of data was stolen. So they kind of got a pretty large payout from it, where they paid out $5 million. And because of such a large payout, there was so much media attention. The FBI were very heavily involved, kind of hunting down the group and trying to disrupt their activities, that the group said they decided to, because of pressure from authorities, decided to dissolve and went dark. So it is worth noting that only a couple months later, the DOJ did manage to seize back just over 2 million of the cryptocurrency that was exchanged in the ransom. This was actually probably the first moment of the DOJ demonstrating that they were able to do this sort of like blockchain analysis and being able to follow the money within cryptocurrency. This was a sort of technique that had been being kept like a secret for a while. So that was kind of like a big moment, and it kind of did this disruption of this whole idea that cryptocurrency is covert and anonymous, and you're totally fine if you pay via cryptocurrency. So even at just this stage, you can kind of see how they changed their activities. So because there's such media attention surrounding the colonial pipeline, obviously a lot of organizations decided, okay, well, we need to pull our shit together and like robust our systems. So they did a lot of like, this is when a lot of organizations started introducing like mandatory phishing training, your annual cybersecurity awareness training. A lot of people just kind of became a bit more like aware as well. So to kind of combat this, Black Hat or Dark Side started utilizing a lot more social engineering techniques and generally like improving their phishing. So it wasn't such just like unbelievably bad phishing that like you can't really believe that people click. It was a little bit better than that. Because of it as well, they started utilizing, obviously more organizations were investing in different tooling. So stuff like the detection and monitoring tooling was improved. So because of this, they started utilizing more living off the land techniques, much more covert and a bit more difficult to detect, because obviously the whole point of using living off the land techniques is that you can, it's difficult for analysts to differ between legitimate activity and not. So they're using tools like PowerShell, WMI, and scheduled tasks to do this. Around the same time, Cobalt Strike started being like really big. It's like a pen testing tool and used in malicious attacks. This was just following the SolarWinds attack that used Cobalt Strike very famously. This wasn't conducted by this group. However, it was a different Russian group, and there was a lot of research to suggest that during this time and still now that the Russian groups share sort of techniques and toolings that they use that are successful. So you can kind of you could say that this was also a technique that they improved at this time. They changed up their data exfiltration. Some of like the C2 monitoring can be was like massively improved. So they started utilizing cloud services to kind of pull out all the data, because around this time they started using double extortion techniques as well. So rather than just encrypting data and being like, okay, well, you need to pay me the money if you want your data unencrypted, it's also saying, okay, well, if you want your data, if you're not going to pay the ransom, we've also stolen it, and we're also going to steal that off, sell that off. DarkSide also used to have all their chat rooms and their forums open for the public eye. You can actually go and find them in various spaces and what they used to look like. They're kind of like archived. Those are now, so all of the like negotiations with your victims in the ransomware group, they were open. Anyone could see what was going on. And now they've closed them off, and you have to go through a victim verification wall to kind of see that information. So the group reemerged as Black Matter in a very short time span. This was around July 2021, I believe we're on. Yes, July 2021. Oh, it's right there. And that would help. So they returned then, and you could kind of see instantly that they were not a new kid on the block. They were utilizing exactly the same, like quite more sophisticated, like I mentioned, techniques. They instantly hit out with their first ransom being 300K, which was like would be unheard of if they were a new group. Their max ransom within a short time span of 6 months ranked up to 30 million. And by November 2021, once again said they're experiencing pressure from the authorities, and announced that they were going to be going dark again. If you want to talk about geopolitical sort of aspect of this, obviously this is a few months before the invasion of Ukraine by Russia. So there was a lot of pressure from the US on Russia during this time to say, sort of, you need to do something about all the threat actors and activities that's going on, otherwise there's going to be sort of sanctions, etc., etc. And so Russia complied, and this is when they went dark. But you could say that this was probably a strategic kind of movement because Russia were planning this invasion of Ukraine in a few months' time. And evidently, they came back. So again, we can talk about how they diversified their techniques once again. So their social engineering massively improved. Their phishing became not just like phishing, but it became targeted malicious attacks on specific people within organizations, very well researched. They began blackmailing people to turn them into insiders for initial access. During this time as well, they developed their first malware in Rust. This was the first instance of this within basically any threat group, and became dubbed as the first professionally made malware. And it kind of became really evident that these groups are not just like people in their basements doing it in their spare time for a little bit of extra cash or because they've got a vendetta. It's a business. It's very intelligent people putting their time, their money, their training towards it. It's their jobs, really. They also adopted a triple extortion technique. So I mentioned you got your single extortion ransomware encrypted, your double extortion, which is stealing the data. Triple extortion is threatening to DDoS the organizations. So even if they did have sort of like backups, they didn't care about data getting published, they don't care about the threat to their intellectual property, or if they have confidential data, they are threatened with DDoS attacks, meaning that even if they wanted to, they couldn't really resume back to normal operations, especially because of how big of a threat Black Cat are. They were sort of saying, like, we couldn't even combat this if we wanted. So it leads a lot of people into feeling that they have to pay. So Black Cat kind of coming up to now. So in March 2024, ever since then, they came back, we're running rampant, right? March 2024, Black Cat launched an attack on Change Healthcare. So if you don't think you know Change Healthcare, you probably do. They are a subsidiary of United Healthcare, as in, yes, that United Healthcare that had their CEO shot not very long ago. And also because of this attack was so severe that United Healthcare ended up paying a 22 million ransomware payment to the group. Because of such a large payout, the group decided to once again go dark because there was such mass media like hysteria surrounding it. And they also pulled a bit of an exit scam on their affiliates. So this is something from a forum, and this is one of the affiliates complaining that they've been scammed by the ransomware group. So obviously, essentially, the whole model of a ransomware as a service group and having your affiliates is that in your payments that you receive, you're supposed to share the money off. And essentially what the core Black Cat group have done is that they've made off with the money, leaving a lot of affiliates in the dust. So because of this, it's left a lot of very angry people kind of left in the dust looking for another parent ransomware group to go to. So that kind of leads us to our current day, because Black Cat dissolved. There's evidence to suggest that they have moved on to 2 different ransomware groups. So the first being Ransom Hub, which we'll kind of come back to in a second. And I asked someone before this, how do you say this? And now I've forgotten it again. It's cicada, like the bug. And they're both very well-known groups. Is it cicada or cicada? It doesn't matter. Cicada. I knew, 50-50 chance, guys. Yeah. And it's said it's also not just because they were pissed off looking for somewhere to go. It was also said to be probably a strategic movement to kind of diversify their risk and kind of fracturing off, rather than being this one group that kind of re-emerging. It's that they're fracturing off into already established groups, and it meant that they can kind of decentralize once again and diversify their risk to government disruptions. So second up, we have Lockbit. So Lockbit, you've probably heard of as well, are another ransomware as a service group. First emerged around 2019, but became very prolific during 2022. They're financially motivated. They are found on Russian language forums, also obviously deny it, but they sort of claim, they claim they're not Russian, but they're seen on these forums. And again, there's evidence to suggest that they also avoid Commonwealth of Independent State countries. And to just kind of get an idea of how like prolific this group really were, in 2023, they were responsible for around 33% of all ransomware attacks that were kind of being carried out across the globe. So Lockbit were really well known for having like really strong affiliates. So they had access to like Hive initial access brokers. They were really well known for having insider threats, again, blackmailing people, turning them over because they could offer people such large sums. They would very well research their victims, find people who are in struggling financially struggling situations, and offer them a large amount of money, which is obviously one of these moments where it's kind of like too good an opportunity to pass up for a lot of people. They were known for a lot of like staffing recruitment drives. They quite liked being quite public facing as a group, which was quite unusual for a ransomware kind of during the time. It's one of the first instances of seeing it. They liked posting things on like different forums, social media. They held a technical writing competition to kind of like give money off and recruit people as well. But around it, because of being so like big mouth surrounding it, there's a lot of arrests that kind of carried out. So in 2022, they arrested 2 Russian nationals, and this kind of sparked a 2.5 year investigation called Operation Kronos. So this was a collaborative effort with the NCA, Europol, Interpol. I think the FBI were involved as well. Everyone had a finger involved in this operation. Because of it, they seized sites, a lot of infrastructure takedown, websites down, negotiation sites, domains that they had, and carried out more arrests. What was quite unique about Operation Kronos, though, is that they published a lot of the data, as in the government organizations published a lot of the data that they received from this investigation. So the people that they didn't manage to arrest or they couldn't find because of various reasons, that they're living in different countries, they couldn't sanction them, etc. They would name them, put them publicly out there, sort of like as a wanted poster kind of idea. They published a lot of the information about the infrastructure that they had, almost in like a mocking tone as well. It was saying that they had shit infrastructure, to really say that what they were doing wasn't actually that sophisticated and that they were kind of bluffing a lot of the time. They also released Lockbit 4.0. This was in development, their new strain. So they released that, kind of ruined all the development of this. And they released also the decryptor for the newest Lockbit strain, which was 3.0, which had been one of the most like prolific ones. So the sort of immediate impact you can see from this is, because the decryptor was released, obviously organizations were able to, maybe if they had data that they never managed to recover, they could suddenly decrypt it. Because Lockbit 4.0 was released, there was a whole, it was kind of like a smear campaign against them. Their reputation heavily damaged. Affiliates started moving on because they were sort of saying Lockbit's not quite what it was anymore. And so their reputation was heavily damaged. What was quite good is that the threat research came off the back of it. We kind of gained a lot of this because it was so publicly done. There was a lot of forum discussion from other threat actors. It's kind of saying, oh, well, Lockbit did this quite badly. I would have done this. And it meant that you were kind of getting free intelligence about red teaming, which was quite good to kind of read if you were interested in that sort of area. Quite interestingly, though, for the Lockbit 4.0, so Lockbit have continued their operations, you could say, and they have since released, apparently, 4.0. They said a release that we're releasing it mid-February, and so that was only like a week and a half ago, so I can't really comment on what the effects are yet. If 4.0 is as good as they said it was going to be, if it's even been released, we don't know. We're going to have to wait for the fallout of that. If you're interested in Operation Kronos, Trend Micro have like a fantastic report detailing Operation Kronos, everything that was kind of carried out, all the fallout from it. And in it, they were documenting, so these are like clusters of malicious activities that were being carried out by Lockbit. And immediately after Operation Kronos, you can see that it kind of plummeted to nil. There was an isolated cluster of activity targeting South Korea. What's quite interesting is no one really knows why. No one knows what happened there. I don't know if it was maybe an affiliate that kind of fell out and managed to like finish off their operations during the operation, and were kind of just swept under the rug. So never got to the bottom of that one. So the long-term impact of this, though, is that there was a lot of movement of the staff. So the integral pen test team at Lockbit have moved on to sort of other big players like Akira or Play or Blacksuit. There was also a disgruntled developer who released the Lockbit 3.0 builder. So it was all a bit strange, and it was made to seem like originally that there was some like underground threat research group that were operating not as a government body, but as like sort of like a grey hat hacker, and said that they released the builder, but it was eventually realized it was actually just a disgruntled developer releasing the builder. Because of this, it meant that there was a lot of free tools suddenly available to people who were maybe lesser sophisticated, and it meant that suddenly you have these people who not so good, like script kiddies, having access to insanely sophisticated tooling, can see how builders are being developed and can kind of use them as a tool as well for launching ransomware attacks. And you can also kind of track this, that this actually was happening because the victims, there was about 312 victims by Lockbit, and in 77 of the victims, there was no reference to Lockbit communications during that time. It was just that they were using, they happened to be using Lockbit tooling. So it was obviously getting utilized by people out with the group. So to kind of encompass this, there's a lot of knock-on effects where Lockbit and Black Cat have kind of moved on to Ransom Hub, which is now this like monstrous conglomerate of ransomware, which obviously wasn't really the intended idea behind the government disruptions, but alas, it's what's happened. And Ransom Hub are now, I think, were named very recently like the most prolific group of 2024 in ransomware by like an astronomical amount compared to everyone else. What has happened though is that there's been like a 35% drop in the amount of cash, like ransomware payments that have happened over the past year. There's generally less ransomware attacks happening also, but what is up is lesser sophisticated actors carrying out ransomware attacks. So yes, you could say ransomware is down, but there are more people building up sort of techniques and abilities surrounding this area. You could also say this is because of things like they're also targeting more sort of small, medium enterprises, because obviously you don't really go after as many. If you're a small time like hacker, you're not going to go after these big conglomerates. You're going to go after your low-hanging fruit, and they're utilizing quite sophisticated tooling. You can also say this is because of things like a buzzword of a bit of saying like, oh, they have access to AI. I don't really think that's like true at this point in time. Maybe they're using AI to create better phishing because of like translation and things like that. But I wouldn't say that they're using AI in their attacks quite yet at this time. That's just my personal opinion. But you could also say another, what also kind of plays into this if you want to start talking about geopolitics, is that your bigger players are probably invested more in sort of geopolitical warfare that's going on in many places across the globe currently. So they're maybe not quite involved in the sort of the ransomware attacks that are going on like organizations. So to kind of talk about the challenges this creates for analysts, and kind of what this all really means. So far we've discussed like what's happening, how governments are disrupting these organizations, how they're changing their attacks. But really, like, what does all that mean for like me as a threat intel researcher at the Weir Group? And basically, it can be split into like a few different things. So your monitoring detection gets quite disrupted. So this is a sort of like theoretical model for defining attribution and arguably different indicators groups can like we can create that they'll be monitored by. So this is called the pyramid of pain. And essentially, what happens is at the bottom, we have like things like hashes or IP addresses. So for a group to change their malicious files, hashes, very easily done. Their IP addresses of their infrastructure, very easily done. right? But the further up you go, so sort of like their tools that they're using or their TTPs generally, that's very hard for them to just change and in an instant for like attack by attack. Similarly, though, for analysts, it's very easy to obtain the hashes and the IP addresses and maybe even the domain names of all of the sort of threat actors and groups that you're interested in, and you can use these as indicators within your state. However, if you've obtained like TTPs that you can definitively apply for attribution to these groups, and suddenly they change it because they've been disrupted, all that research kind of goes out the window and you've kind of got to start from scratch again. So it's kind of like a good thing and a bad thing where you're kind of chasing it round in circles. What's also kind of disrupted is monitoring the dark web. So I kind of touched on this earlier as well. So if you have access to like forums or chat rooms that you've worked really hard to get into, as a threat researcher, it's quite dangerous and not an easy feat to gain access to these sort of forums and sites. And suddenly they've been taken down. You're suddenly going to have to start from scratch again at finding where to go and how are you now going to have to verify yourself to gain access once again if you're essentially like a white hat. Your attribution confidence modeling as well is disrupted. So this is basically to say, if you know that Lockbit, for example, are using this Lockbit builder, and you can say, if this builder appears, it's most definitely Lockbit, right? But suddenly the builder is being utilized by other groups. So now if you're looking and you've gone, okay, well, I've been ransomwared and they've used the Lockbit builder to ransom me, you don't know anymore if you're being threatened by Lockbit or if you're being threatened by like a 14-year-old in a basement that's operating solely. So because of this, suddenly, and that's kind of plays into your risk factor, where if you think you're being ransomed by Lockbit, you're going to have to heavily consider, are you going to pay this ransomware? But if it's probably a lesser threat, you're maybe not so bothered, and you're going to think you're kind of taken into that risk analysis, which is the kind of the whole aspect of the game. So basically, the more tooling that's available, and suddenly people are using the infrastructure because it's been diverted and people no longer know, and you can say you're Lockbit, but you're not really Lockbit. It becomes difficult to kind of analyze that risk as an organization. Finally, what we can also talk about is predictive analysis. So 50% of what a threat analyst will do is strategic work. So this is basically creating, predicting what you think is going to happen in the future. So it's never definitive. It'll never be absolutely for 100%, but you can make a pretty good guess based off like a lot of factors. So you'll take into account things like world events, are there elections coming up, geopolitics of the current state of the world, the state of technology, any like big advancements in technology at that time, maybe an organizational change is happening that's quite publicly being made, maybe they're buying over another company, maybe they've decided to start operating in another region. So this all kind of takes into it. You could literally go on forever for all the factors that kind of plays into your predictive analysis. However, when your predictive analysis kind of gets, well, I can show you, is, so this is like a graph. So what you can do is you can obtain loads of data, right? You can pull it in. So it'll be like all your incidents or all your alerts, right? And you'll pull it in and you'll go, okay, well, this is what happens during an attack. So if a vulnerability is released and you see, okay, this is the timeline that has happened for an attack to successfully happen with that vulnerability, and you can kind of predict, and you can use that data to go, okay, well, another vulnerability has come out that was a similar one to that one. So they were both remote code execution vulnerabilities. They have a rating of over 9, and you go, okay, we've got one like this. We can predict this is how it will kind of span out. So if it took 2 days for actors, that would be mental, but say it took, a vulnerability came out and it took 2 days for actors to enact on it, and it happened again, you can go, okay, we've got 2 days to react. And you can kind of use it for creating prioritization and risk within your organization. So to kind of develop your predictive analysis, when you're pulling in all this data, you can kind of use it with machine learning. So obviously the red line is what's actually happening, and the blue line is the machine learning here. And the aim would be to have the lines as close together and as similar as possible. But when actors do something that's quite unexpected, this is flagged as an anomalous event. So this is the spiking in the red data you can see is the anomalous activity, and you can see that the blue line is struggling to match this sort of activity. And this is called time series modeling, and it's used for anticipating sort of your future threats and how you'll react. So when this happens, it can kind of fub your data, especially if you don't expect it and you're finding out at the same time as actors in real time. So just some extra thoughts about this as well. What this talk is not about is saying that government disruption is bad in any way, or that it ruins all intelligence and we should leave it for monitoring. Disruptions like this are not a new concept. They're an age as old as time. They've been using it for years in sort of organized crime as well. It goes very far back. It's often needed, and it's massively improved over the years. It's just kind of like the nature of a cat and mouse game where you go around in circles. Thankfully, it's also what keeps a lot of us in the job, that they keep coming back in a kind of morbid way. A lot of the disruption, however, that is carried out is very intentional. There's a lot of specific, I can't say the words, it's very specific to it. What's difficult, though, if you work in sort of the public domain, so I don't work for the government, is I don't know what they mean to be doing by these attacks, and you sort of have to guess as you're going along what they mean, and it's that difficulty of understanding the disruption. So the sort of like key takeaways from this is that it is a very convoluted sort of situation. It's not as easy, and it's always going to be on a case-by-case basis. It always depends on how big is the threat, who are they targeting, does it apply to you, etc., etc. What I will say is that in the future we can kind of expect this to continue, especially as like governments continue to create regulations and organizations, so they become more enforced and cybersecurity becomes more of a standard. Organizations are investing more in cybersecurity than ever, and they're creating more robust functions. There is something to be said about sort of organizations as researchers. If you think something doesn't apply to you, you should probably still be following along with these operations. So say there was a group that was most prolifically known for targeting sort of healthcare and education, you might think, oh, I wouldn't care that much about that sort of group. And that's awful, right? But you see what I mean. But suddenly they have to divert their activities, and they join a new, maybe some affiliates join a new ransomware as a service group that go, oh, well, we're mostly heavily financially motivated and we target primarily manufacturing. But now I'm trying to catch up on all this data, and I've not been following along because I think it didn't apply to me. So there's a little bit of like push and pull with it, where you kind of need to, you can't research everything, but maybe you also should. So a lot of the sources that I use today as well, if you want to discuss, feel free. I won't say that I have all like the URLs for every paper I read in my head, but there's also something, there's always a pinch of salt to be taken with threat intelligence. This is all, in my opinion, this is from my research, but you might have read something where you go, oh, well, that's not how I remember it. And we can happily have a fight about that as well. So, yeah, little plug. So obviously at Weir, I actually started out there as an intern in my third year. I did internships every summer of my university career. And I would say Weir's was probably the most like career changing for me, because I ended up back there, obviously, and that's now where I am. This summer we are having more interns. I think we're going to take on probably like 2 more interns. So if you're in your third year and you're looking for one, have a chat. The applications aren't open yet, but like they will do. And so if you're keen, you can speak to me. And I can see Zach came in. He's there. He's waving. He's in the white sweater. He's more senior than me, so you should speak to him probably. And so, yeah. What I will say is that the internship will be in Glasgow. That's where our HQ office is, and we do encourage the interns to kind of come in most often, like basically every day, honestly, just to kind of set that expectation for any like students. It's because obviously you just get way better FaceTime, you learn way more, you learn way quicker, and it's what I did, and I have to say it works. It's better than being on Teams. So yeah, also it's a blue team role. The amount of people that said like, oh, I love pen testing, can I come intern? And I go, that's not what we do. So just also setting that expectation. But if you think you love pen testing or you love red teaming, but you're only in third year, I'd say keep your options open. Okay. So anyway, thank you. Is there any questions to kind of go over? Oh. Yes. Most frustrating thing I have to deal with as a threat. Sometimes it is very difficult to find the information, and also it's finding reliable information that you can pull in and say, yes, this is true, and then suddenly a week later someone debug buffs it, and you go, well, okay, well, I've written up a report now. That's pretty frustrating. It takes a lot of time and patience. When it comes to like accumulating your sources and stuff, it's not a sort of like easy thing to get into. So yeah, when it comes to different threats, I would say that's pretty annoying. And also sometimes the groups just generally behave really badly in their sort of thing, that they like lie, and you go, well, that was annoying for the reliability of my information. So, and that's the game. Declan. Yeah. Well, you can never, yeah. So I see where you're going with that. You can never really say for sure what the hell Trump's doing. First and foremost, we'll say that. In the reform, are you talking about the efficiency where they've been firing a lot of their like state staff? Because that's been happening. I don't know how much they've been affecting their cyber staff. I can never say. I'd have to read who they've decided to fire that week or rehire that week. You can say, though, you can talk about Trump's politics a lot, about how China as a threat, the USA are obsessed with China being their threat, and they're not necessarily wrong about that. Obviously, James Clan did his whole presentation today and talked a lot about China as a threat, and he mentioned exactly that Trump is just obsessed, that sort of idea. You don't know. The thing with the FBI is that they released such little information. Actually, something that I didn't talk about there is that Black Cat at one point talked about having pressure from the authorities, and it was kind of insinuated that it was the USA's fault that they had pressure. But if you actually research it quite thoroughly and you read some intel like data, it's actually never, you think it's probably actually a lie how much the US had pressure during that time. I think it was from dark side to black matter, and the USA just decided to take credit for it because it was quite a nice situation where the group could use it to change, the group could use it as a chance to sort of rebrand and go dark, and it looked good for the USA to kind of strut their front and say that they were responsible for it. So doesn't really answer your question, but anyone else? Yes, Joe. What?
Who would you say should be the most scared right now? Like a certain industry that's more screwed than others.
What industry? What industry is the most screwed? Probably healthcare. Like, let's be real. Especially because healthcare is like underfunded. Sorry, I realized that you work quite closely in that area. Yeah, you're fucked. No, so like healthcare, so they use things like they have OT like incorporated into their healthcare. It's like IoT devices within healthcare. It's becoming more and more utilized, but they're so awfully underfunded, and they're still using horrible systems. I think like the whole thing with WannaCry is that they were still using like Windows XP, like machines, and like so obviously that's going to happen. I don't know the NHS very closely, but I'm not just talking about the NHS. I'm talking globally. People are always cutting corners, and the first thing they're cutting corners on is like in healthcare first and foremost, because they want to put their money to the front of their patients, which is not a bad thing, but it's also not a good thing. So I'd also say personally, because of my bias, like OT, right? That's horrible. I work at Weir, and yeah, it's like a multi-billion company, or whatever. But also, it's like OT in its nature is always going to be because people just love manufacturing. I think manufacturing and healthcare are the top two most targeted industries. It changes every year depending on what's going on, but yeah, Stevie.
This is more of a corporate question. I'm interested how you, Zach, and the rest of the team demonstrate your value to the board or people higher up in the year group so successful in defending these ransomware.
Yeah. Well, so successful in ransomware attacks is very nice to say, because Weir Group famously had a ransomware attack in 2021. However, that was pre-team, so it means we're absolved from that. Basically, how does anyone prove sort of their cybersecurity grip to their organization and their worth? Because organizations, I would say now more than ever again, are looking to cut costs, right? And the way you kind of do that is in your tooling, you create metrics. So people bloody love a metric. And the board specifically, that's all they want to see. They want to see a number to prove it. So you can use things like how many IOCs you're pulling in, and how many things are getting blocked, and how many things you're actually like how many true positive incidents you're triaging on a daily. And you can kind of affiliate that in the cost by going, okay, well, we had this many high severity attacks, and that could have led to this many attacks, like ransomware attacks. And you can kind of use the numbers that are saying like, okay, well, this is the cost of a data breach, or this is the cost of a ransomware attack. And you can kind of pull in that data together. And I think that's how we do it at the Weir Group as well. And I imagine that's how many organizations do it, is you want to see the data, really, instead of going, well, I'm pretty sure we're doing something right because we've not had an attack in so many days. Yeah. Okay, I think we're good. Nice, thank you, guys.